So that's one example of how we set up a COE for a financial services company. And COE is the only TLA that I'm going to talk about. What is the TLA? Three-letter acronym, exactly. There's only TLA in my presentation for you. COE stands for Center of Excellence. So we have a COE model for them where we have mirrored their silos into different COEs. They're all federated together. We have a central governance. And our COEs work with each other, passing information around and talking to each other about if there is a customer segmentation issue where one particular segment is increasing in risk. We talk to them, we talk to operations, figure out what should be the change in credit policy that you need to do. So that entire integrated analytics for running the company's services is being done at Genpact. And this was something that we arrived at using DFS. So I spoke to you about framework. So I'm just going to give you a quick glimpse of the different models that can arrive from the same framework. Using the same DFSS methodology, you can arrive at different answers. So the traditional one is to do ad hoc outsourcing. You suddenly discover you have a lot of data, you want a certain type of report, you don't have the bandwidth, try to find some analysts from an analytical shop. So sometimes we start there because there are budgetary constraints. There are also constraints around the client's ability to reveal data. There is a lot of confidential information as well. Then it turns out into projects. Sometimes companies look at it as, I don't want to set up any structure. I just want this kind of information coming in regularly to me. So this is a project for me, just do the project for us. So once we get that type of VOC, we end up in a project sharing sort of model where it is, we have a team supporting projects. Projects could be in a wide variety of scope, or it could be only a particular time. The Center of Excellence model itself, there are three models to them. There is a decentralized model. Risk will be talking with its own vendor. Marketing will be talking to its own vendor. That's typically the case where they don't have a lot of cohesion between these silos. We try to break them as much as possible, but sometimes the company takes a stance to let it be in different domains. Then we have a federated structure, which we just saw, where you have each of the COEs working independently with each of the divisions, but there is a central governance of the workers. And finally, we also have centralized models with some, where what they need is essentially people with a variety of analytics experience and domain expertise who can pick up anything from risk or marketing or operations. What they want to do is, these companies come in, these are some of the best-in-class companies. They come in and say, we are always going to need analysis. So we want a pool of analysts who are working with us. This year, we may give you more risk. Next year, it will be more cost operations. Day after tomorrow, we want you to help us build products. But we want to work with you to enable that function. Because they find it difficult to get the people themselves. They want to focus on their core business, which is making the products that make them famous. And this is where DFSS helps a lot. There was a question. Sorry. This is where DFSS helps a lot, because setting up the process up front, the right process for them, depending on the needs, their management buy-in, helps us in setting it up for success from day one. And that's where we leverage the power of DFSS to set up service delivery models that are extremely aligned with what the client needs and are flexible to move between these different silos based on how the need changes over time. So here's where I want to stop talking and start discussing.
It's more of like organization change strategy kind of.
So there's obviously a lot of change management also that comes along with it, but when we are able to present it in a structured methodology this way, it comes less salesy and more in terms of what their needs are. And we are able to make a better connect with the customer on why this particular model works best. So we're not just doing it for business excellence, we are also able to convert that into new business opportunities. So, yeah, please.
Statistical methods for reversing.
So in this particular example, we didn't use too much of it. But in DFSS, typically where you use statistical measures is in the analyze phase. When you're analyzing whether a particular service design will work in a context, you may look at, I need a KPI, that is, if I'm running as a call center operation, I need 99.9% first time right, first pass yield. I want to resolve the query in the first call. How do you set that up? Right? So when you look at a model and say, this is how the process flows, this is the data that we can collect. You run a small pilot. Use that data, do statistical analysis, prove that it will actually work at scale. That's where it comes in. So DFSS is a very flexible, fungible sort of methodology. It keeps twisting and turning. And like I said, it's not so much about being able to find the right insights out of data. It's more about what is a solution that will work in the existing realistic scenario for the customer. So if you and I do a DFSS project separately, it is very likely that we both will end up in two different solutions. And you should not be, both of them will not be wrong. Both of them are right.
So here measure phase of DFSS and measure phase of DMAC.
Yeah.
What are the exact differences?
So the measure phase of DMAC is a little bit more statistical, more about data, whether you have the right data, what is the data collection plan, and so on. In DFSS, it will be more around if a customer is looking for a certain output. What is it that the current incumbent solution is not able to deliver to that? What are the KPIs and additional constraints that we need to look out for? So the measure phase actually sets up the landscape and converts it into requirements that the new solution should become. So if broadly speaking, design will move from converting a VOC into a quantifiable CTQ. The measures phase will move from a quantifiable CTQ to what is the design requirement. The analyze phase will drill it down to the nth level of detail and make it specifications. And then once you have the specifications, you can start designing. That's how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, are you using DFSS for any other kind of process design in any other area?
We are using it for other processes as well. So the way we are looking at it is, I represent largely the analytics business, which is why I'm using examples from there. But we have used DFSS in the past to, for example, we were looking at for a particular organization, their collection strategy was not working. Their recoveries were very low. So we worked with them to set up a DFSS strategy on what should be their channel mix. Which channels were working better, which ones were not. There's some amount of analysis obviously in that. But it was more of a process design for them to change their existing collection strategy to a different strategy. So it typically works when you're trying to, in service design, especially, it works when you're trying to set up frameworks. We have used DFSS internally ourselves to set up, skill set mapping. So at the end of the day, you are a business where, especially in analytics, you are a business where the skills are very different. Somebody servicing a risk client versus somebody servicing a collection client has very different skills. But we've been able to find commonalities in that and figure out how to cross-train people and move them from one business to another. We've used DFSS frameworks in those. What sort of training program should we have in place to be able to move people?
I heard some of the GE businesses like Aircraft and all, you basically build a 9 Sigma model.
Yes.
And is that framework different than?
It is very similar actually. When you come down to the specifications, you go to 9 Sigma. So you want your aircrafts to be 9 Sigma, right? 6 Sigma is not good enough. You can't have an accident every 2 years. You want no accidents for 25 years.
Is this more about logical than statistical?
It is more about logical than statistical, yes.
So don't use those regular histograms, standard deviation?
Not so much. It depends on when you're setting up a process, if that is very extremely KPI and metrics driven, and you have a lot of data, you can use statistical analysis. But otherwise, it deals more with frameworks.
Any example that can, or any some success to that you have said this much for you, some of your client?
So
Using
this
DFS.
particular example that I gave you for the financial services business that we work with, we at Genpact we are famous for measuring ourselves on business impact. What sort of business impact do we drive for the customer? This case, when we were doing only risk, our business impact year on year was about 100 million. When we did the DFSS model and set up a federated structure for them, it took about 2 years to actually set that up. We moved that 100 million to $1 billion. There's the amount of cost savings in terms of running their operations better across silos that we could make.
Your comments on the future of existing Six Sigma frameworks like DMAC or DFSS as compared to the more advanced analytic framework, like now we have Big Data or Hadoop and all analytic tools now.
Sure. I sort of alluded to that, but it's a good question. Let me repeat what I said and in a slightly different manner. I think if I go back to the elements, right? So all the other tools that you mentioned typically are either technology driven or data scientist driven. It's more about how do I solve a problem with the tool. But what we often miss out in such cases is that implementing is always a process. And even if you use a tool, there are still people, there are still processes. It's part of a larger business process. So I don't see that Six Sigma will go away anytime soon. In fact, it will become richer with the use of these tools. So the Six Sigma principles will continue to guide the process side of it. And as we look at Lean, for example, you have to start looking at, you have big data, but which part of that data is actually relevant? In the earlier talk today, we were talking about 5% is the observable universe, right? Which 5% of the data should you pick up? So that's where Lean and Six Sigma will help a lot in narrowing down to the right scope.
Same for Six Sigma and physical process reengineering. Are they concur or they different?
Quite different actually. So process reengineering, it tends to be more tactical. Design for Six Sigma looks at a more strategic level of what is it that you want to achieve as a business. In process reengineering, you're looking at this particular process is ineffective now because of this particular reason. I want to change that. So you have a very specific problem. DFSS tends to be a lot more holistic. You start with a very easy VOC, sometimes, DFSS. This is why it's probably not used that often as well. Yeah.
So if we look at DMAP, right, so we have a set of tools we follow. So this is what you need, science choosing slices. What would you recommend, or what is industry standard? So what is the frequently used tools in DFSS?
So there are many of them. I'm going to name a few that will help. One of the, obviously, everybody knows about QFD. But to arrive at the QFD, right? So when you're looking at a DFSS project, how do you know that your items that you have listed out on the row are the right ones? And the items that you have listed out on the column are the right ones. So there are a lot of tools that help to do that. There is affinity analysis. You hear a lot from different stakeholders and you figure out what are those few things that are coming in again and again.
Survey
even, yeah. You also have tree analysis where you look at, sometimes people are talking at a very high level and you have to go deeper to say, okay, if you mean that my risk is too high, what does that mean? Does that mean charge off is too high? Does it mean that your acquisition is incorrect? So you break it down into a tree and analyze each of those elements separately to figure out where you need to fix the problem. So there is TRIZ. TRIZ is used quite often. TRIZ is used quite
I
often.
understand. So these tools are more of like brainstorming tools. Actually.
Yes.
But is there any other tool which can tell us, I mean, quantifying way of saying, hey, the process that you've done is good or bad?
From a quantification standpoint.
Yeah.
Like p-value.
Example.
I see. So I think most DFSS projects that we have seen, the quantification is more on cost benefit. So that's the best indicator for you to say that you're going down the right path. Okay. There's typically not so much p-values there.
We were doing this for Amazon actually, so
I see. We'll catch up on that. Okay, I've been asked to finish. I can take one last question maybe, if there is one. Okay, thank you so much.
We have a big round of applause.
Sorry for spoiling your photo sessions, but I think we have to get the session started. So I hope we'll have more chances to take the pictures after that. My name is Tathagat Verma. I work for 24/7 and a very interesting role really talking about how to really bring the whole notion of agility and lean thinking across the organization, not just software development, but actually looking at pre-sales, sales, marketing, business development, optimization, data sciences, and everything. But I'm going to talk something very different here. I'm going to talk about innovation games. Anyone has heard of this term before? Okay, so I can say anything that I like.
We have heard about games.
You read about games? Is there anyone who likes to play game here? Okay, so only about 1/3 of the people like games here.
Everyone likes it. We like to have fun.
We like to have fun?
Yeah.
Does everyone like to have fun?
Yes.
Okay. Is your workplace fun?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Some of. Sometimes.
We make it fun.
We make it fun? That's a good word. We make it fun. So let's see if this stuff, innovation games that I'm going to talk about, can make it even more fun than what it is today, right? I'm sure it's a fun, but I'm going to put a slide here and ask you whether that's the kind of fun that you have today, right? We'll check that. So let's get going. Every conference, every meeting, everywhere you go to, every CEO presentation you listen to, innovation is probably going to be taking tops in terms of number of times it comes up in the presentation and in terms of the conversation, right? So let's set the context. How many of you in this room have a charter for innovation? Let me go again. How many of you, okay, I'll start from 20 years back we used to ask that question. How many people are responsible for quality of a product?
Everybody.
You get the drift, right? So let me go again. How many of you have the charter or are responsible for innovation in your company? Right? So I'm still not saying 100%, but I'm assuming that that's as close an agreement I'm going to get here today, right? Let me ask another question. How many of you get up or you got up today morning promising to yourself that I am going to leave 5 bugs in my software today? Any of you? No, none of us, right? So none of us really get up in the morning saying that I am going to leave 5 bugs or I'm going to inject 5 bugs into the product there, right? But yet, when I asked you the question, I kind of put you in a spot by asking how many of you are responsible for innovation. It didn't come across very intuitively to many of us that yes, I have a charter for innovation, I'm responsible for innovation, right? So that's exactly the point I want to drive is. Innovation is not something that's going to be spelled out loud and clear to any of us that says, innovation, thou shalt innovate. And yet, it's as much a charter for all of us as we say, quality is everybody's job, right? I'll just go and close that. Okay, much better now. So let's see what are some of the things. I don't know how much of print you can read there, but let me try and help there. So if you see, actually, this is one of the things that came out, the innovation imperative at a glance. And some of the things that come out are very striking in this. For example, this is from a people point of view. This is actually from candidates when they go for a job at the companies. How do they really look at a company being innovative or not? So if you see what's happening here is that only 37% of the candidates think their current company is innovative. That means 1/3 of us believe that our current company is not innovative. Sorry to break the bad news, you all said your company was innovative. and a good 79% they would feel motivated by innovative working methods. So if you actually see 4 out of 5 people do not feel motivated today because they do not feel that there are enough, you have a question? Okay. And there are some other ones here, for example, what are the barriers? 44% of the candidates would be more likely to leave a company that failed to engage them in an innovative way, even during the recruitment time. And we are not talking about retention here. We are just talking about how do you really treat somebody when they come and walk inside your office for a recruitment opportunity. So that's the kind of stakes that we are talking about here. And what happens despite all this thing is that we are realizing that the whole innovation journey, the whole innovation thought process is a very broken process in most of the places. We do a great job of paying lip service to innovation, but the reality is very different, it's broken. And a lot of these dysfunctions are actually proudly sponsored by, can you guess whom? Any thoughts? I'm sorry?
Management.
I won't call it management, I won't be so harsh on management. I think all of us contribute to that. I think all of us have mental models that stop us from doing it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to make enemies with all, you're all awesome people. I'm not here to make enemies with you, but that's exactly the mental model that we have that stops us from saying, I don't think I'm responsible for innovation. Isn't that guy sitting there in that little bigger cubicle responsible for innovation? I don't think I'm responsible. So that's a mental model I have. Right? It's innovation is above my three levels above my paycheck level, and somebody else is supposed to do that, right? So I think we are all playing games, and that's the game I was talking about that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Are we playing these games? Do you know names for all of them? I think there are a lot of interesting games here, right? Backstabbing, and this is like. I don't know what you call it. Right? It's like it's as if it's holding and opening the manhole for that person. So what really is happening is because of the way we silo ourselves in our minds, not just in physical appearance, not just really saying that I'm a 3rd floor guy and I'm a 4th floor guy, or I'm a finance person or I'm a marketing person. We have these silos in our minds, and that's what really